So at the academy, to bring it back there, you have to take two fighting classes. Like those are requirements, core requirements. So one of them is boxing, and I got wasted in boxing. I was not a good boxer. Like I remember like so the academy is the only place I know where like you have like core PE classes, and the way you get tested is like through measurable skills. So like for these fighting classes like boxing and combatives, which is like you're on the ground like doing chokeholds and stuff. Um, the way they grade you is they put you against some of the students like they're gonna grade you on technique, but you also get points for winning, which is like so nerve wracking because there's only two tests in the entire class, and so it's two fights. I remember on my second boxing fight, and that was when you're allowed to throw your strong hand to your right hand. So the first match, you're only allowed to throw jabs, so your left hand. I got hit with, I can't remember, right-handed, left-handed punch or whatever. I got hit right square in the forehead, and then I fell down. I was like, and my nose started bleeding. I'm like, I swear I'm okay. Like, this looks really embarrassing, I know, but I'm good. But of course, it looked really terrible. And so, like, that was not the match you wanted. But then in combatives, where I actually had some skill, and like, there was a close fight. It's kind of insane how much you enjoy just the nature of like a good, close, competitive fight. And then I think in terms of those combative sports, it brings it out to a whole nother level, and just like because what they want to see and what you're trying to do yourself is like bring out that, see if you have that like inner fight, like that inner kind of quote unquote animal in you, and see if like you can actually bring it out. And I thought that was an interesting and honestly very illuminating like experience at the academy, even though I'll say like to every kid that I hated those classes, but there's some positive to it.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Nuanced Nonsense. We're not experts, but we just like talking. This is your co-host Alex.
This is your other co-host Ben, and I brought on an old-time friend from like old tennis days, Albert. Would you like to say anything else about yourself?
No, thanks for having me, Ben. Alex, appreciate it. Yeah, we go way back, tennis in high school days, and we haven't caught up since, but it's a good chance to chat, and glad to have me on. Thank you.
Yeah, so we typically start off with like a softball question. And prior to this, we had a small delay. So I was playing the Wii, like the original Wii, playing Wii Sports and playing tennis. And I was like, this is kind of like strange when you actually play the sport. So it's like, what do you think of like games that emulate a sport you've played before?
Oh, games that have emulated a sport I played before. I think it's just weird looking at it. I mean, I guess in the context of Wii tennis, it's not really close to movements at all. So it's certainly less stressful, I could say that. And maybe you still get the competitive juices. But it is weird. Personally, I'm a fan of the games that are just not of my sport, I guess. So like FIFA or something like that. But yeah, that's my opinion on it.
What about you, Alex?
I was just trying to think about like, I don't think I've ever really played a sport that could be like a Wii game. I guess specifically in this context, like I swam, but I mean that's just a bunch of button mashing at best, right? You can't go like this. Like I don't know what, but that's not much different from like a cycling game, I guess. But I feel like I play like Wii bowling and something, and it's like different. Wii boxing is really just like you're just like going like this as much as possible. But yeah, like Albert, I also like playing like 2K and FIFA. It's probably very different. It's obviously different from the real experience. You don't have like a gauge bar going like, okay, it's safe to shoot the ball.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you have good form shooting too.
yeah.
But yeah, to sort of get to the main meat of this, my Albert actually went to the Air Force Academy, and I thought it was like super interesting to hear about in our little prep session today. If you want to like elaborate on your like journey from like here to there, A to B.
Yeah. If I'll try and keep it brief, hopefully, just a summary. So Ben and I graduated the same year of high school, 2016. And I went to the Air Force Academy then that summer. And so I think one of the reasons behind it was, I guess one of the things, it was just different. And then also it seemed like a cool opportunity to make an impact. And I wasn't totally against like, oh, I wonder what military life is like. So that's what spurred me to go. Went through basic cadet training in the summer of 2016. Stayed there for 4 years. Now I'm graduated, freshly minted lieutenant. I still don't know as much as I do back then, but hey, they gave me the bars, so guess that's how it goes. And now I'm in Boston.
Boston doing what?
So I'm a graduate student at MIT studying aerospace engineering, still active duty. So this is technically my first assignment. Then after that, I'm going to head to pilot training after that. So that's like my actual job. So this grad student stint is kind of like a temporary gig, so to speak. And then after that, I'll train up for what is supposed to be my real assigned job. And I'm excited for that too. But I'm also excited for the 2 years up here. Excited to see what happens.
Speaking of like pilot training, have you ever watched like pilot movies? Like, I don't know, like Top Gun or something?
Oh, I guess it's a guilty secret that I have is that I haven't watched Top Gun. Like I know all of like the big scenes and stuff, the volleyball scene, like dogfight, Maverick and everything. But like it was kind of like heresy to say that you never watched Top Gun at the Academy. So whenever that topic came up, I just kind of like stay silent and be like, I'll just ride this one through. I'm not going to say anything. So no, actually, but at the Academy it was a pretty big thing. And while there's some stuff that I think is over the top, at least in my impression of the movie, not having watched it, it kind of gets the culture down right. Like it's a very cowboy pilot culture. And it's not necessarily what the Academy tries to instill with you, like institutionally, but it's just the way the culture kind of springs up just for the pilots who are there and just like the cadets they bring. So I guess it gets that right. But it is a curious thing, that culture, I would say.
Interesting. When you said like cowboy pilot, I immediately thought like Cowboy Bebop.
Oh,
Because like if you ever watched that anime, he's like a pilot. Like for space, he has like his own spaceship, and he's just kind of like, I don't want to say trolling around, but he's like kind of doing his own thing. He's very known for being independent.
oh no way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've wanted to watch that one. It's been on my watch list for a while now, but I guess I'll take a look at it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I'd say I have that cavalier mentality, so maybe I don't know if I'll fit into the pilot community per se. That might be tough, but I don't think that's anything to like dissuade me from it. But it's certainly, I think, broadly a cavalier attitude is like like we're out here, especially fighter pilots, we're out here to go get them, go shoot down the enemy, blah blah blah, go fast, pull G's, stuff like that. So it's certainly prevalent. I'm not sure if it's necessarily the right mentality, but I guess there's a reason for it. So
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how like I think most people's image of the military is like everyone's very disciplined, they follow the rules, tradition. But then you also have Top Gun, which I think inspired a lot of people to join the Air Force. Like I know it was to the point where like I think the Air Force was like, I don't know if this is true, but I read it somewhere that they were like willing to help fund like the second one, Top Gun Maverick, because like they got a lot of recruits after the first Top Gun.
yeah,
Like, wow.
I think I heard that as well. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that was what was going on.
I think I saw like a video about like they actually use like a real fighter jet loaned out by the Air Force.
Yeah, they did. And I know that was like, because just looking at some of the scenes of like the dogfight scenes at Top Gun, it was like, yeah, it's not as like zooming around as like, I don't know if y'all watched the Midway movie, but just seeing that like you can tell the CGI just like pops out at you. But Top Gun definitely has that more real feel. So that was I'm personally a fan of that. But
What would you describe as like the differences between the different branches of the military? Because I know like each branch has its own culture. Like there's like the Air Force, the Navy,
true.
the Army, the Marines, the Coast Guard.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of stereotypes and there's a lot of cultural differences. I will try to speak to it as best I can, but I have been in for very short time, so I wouldn't know. So it's just opinion of one man. But I'd say the Army is definitely the biggest kind of like attack the problem head on kind of thing. And it helps, I think, to look at like the officer enlisted ratios too. So, for example, for the Air Force, off the top of my head, I think the force is split 25% officer, 75% enlisted. But for the Army, it's about like 15% officer. And then at the very far end, like with like the Marines, it's like 10% officer. And I think that at least in the officer culture, it boils down to like what they're there to do. So like Army, Marines, huge ground forces components. That means you need a lot of enlisted soldiers who are like going to do the fighting, and then the officers there as like group managers and they're to lead. But in the Air Force, I don't know if you all knew, but only officers can be pilots. So it's actually a very reverse dynamic in that the officers are the ones on the front lines in the Air Force, and they have quote unquote less of a leadership role at the lower levels, while the enlisted are there to like help maintain the aircraft, provide security to the base, logistics, things like that. And there's officers there too. But I think that's a big cultural difference in that at least there comes in like the cavalier mentality, because like in the Army you need to lead people. Like you might be like me, I'd be graduating from West Point or whatever, and I'd be in charge of a platoon of like 20 people already. But here I am, like out of the Air Force, going to school, and then I'm going to be a pilot. I'm not going to be in charge of anybody until at least 6 or 7 years down the road. So I think that's where a big cultural difference comes up. And then I think at its core, it just comes from like the technological reliance of each service. So like Army, Marines, big manpower basis, while the Navy and the Air Force rely a lot on technology. And that just kind of breeds a different culture too.
Do you think, because some people say there's rivalries between different branches, like Marines don't like the Army. I don't know if that's true, but would you say like that is true, like the stereotypes of the rivalries, or
Oh
you
yeah,
actually?
I would certainly say that there's some truth to it. I mean, at the end of the day, like all the cliches are like, oh, we're all in one fight kind of deal. But there's certainly like a good, playful, hearted rivalry. And then I think when you get to the higher levels too, like just at the Pentagon or in Washington D.C., I certainly think there's an actual rivalry there. And at times, I think historically it has shown that sometimes the rivalry has gotten in the way of like effective war fighting or effective management of the armed forces, because sometimes it can get so bad that like, we're fighting over funding, over strategy, and at the end you fund programs that you're not supposed to, or you hurt the force in bad ways, I guess. So yeah, there's definitely truth to it, I would say.
Interesting. It's kind of like five, or I guess six now with Space Force. They're like six different like
Yeah.
war tribes of our country.
Man, yeah,
The Space Force have like the Space Force have like its academy, or like I think you mentioned like some people from the Air Force can choose to go into Space Force.
Yeah, exactly. So since the Space Force is under the Department of the Air Force, the Air Force Academy graduates Space Force people. So it's like the same way the Naval Academy graduates Marine officers. That's how the Air Force Academy did it. So our year was actually the first year that we graduated people. So I'd say about 100 out of the graduating class of 1,000 went to the Space Force. So there was this big like fanfare, even though it was COVID. We still had in-person graduation. I can talk about that. That was kind of whack. But they had 100 Space Force cadets, and it was the first class that graduated Space Force officers. So there's a big hullabaloo about that.
What are they supposed to be doing? Because it's so new.
Oh, I don't know. But it's pretty whack in that, like, I don't know if you understand, but like having like the chief of your service, like the highest ranked general, like a 4-star, come and like visit you is like a huge deal. So the chief of the Space Force went to our graduation and then gave every one of the graduating Space Force cadets like a little memento, like a gift or whatever. Like he was like did all the speeches with all like the national leaders and whatnot, graduation. Then we all went to the dining hall, and there he was like handing out gifts like it was like a candy festival or whatever. And that was super whack. But I don't know what they're doing. Probably the same as what I'm doing, in that I don't really know what I'm doing as of the moment, but we shall see. We shall see.
I don't even know what the Space Force is supposed to do, like generally, like as a unit. Because like my very first thought is like, oh, they're like, I don't know, hacking satellites, or I don't know, flying planes around like the upper area of the atmosphere and stuff like that. But I knew Space Force was like has been around for a while, but it only recently split off into like a 6 like branch.
Exactly. So like there's a big space division in the Air Force, and the academy is pretty steeped in that. So that was actually my major, was astronautical engineering, so the space part of aerospace engineering. But I think their motivation behind splitting it into a Space Force was just the importance of it all. So like there's a lot of stuff that we use, like I think like the exemplar of like the importance of space is like the GPS constellation. So that's actually managed by the Air Force, but it's important for everything, like financial transactions, navigation, like timing for all our computers and stuff like that. So if the GPS constellation were to get knocked down in a conflict, that would be catastrophic for everyone in the world, not just the US. And so I think that's part of the rationale, just realizing, wow, space is really important. So maybe we should create a force that lends it the importance that it deserves, is what I would say. It's not necessarily doing anything different than what it was maybe 5 years ago, but it's just has more attention now, is what I would say.
It's interesting because I remember when some idea of this was first conceived by Ronald Reagan, it was
Yeah.
like propaganda against the
Oh
Soviet.
yeah, like shooting the lasers down. Dude. That propaganda, I mean, whew. I think there's a certain allure to it, most definitely. But and the military is not immune to it either. But yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. Sorry, I don't have anything else on top of
Yeah,
that.
because I feel like when people say Space Force, like if you're talking to like the layman, I feel like their envisionment is like Avengers, right? They're like going to space,
Yeah.
Like Star Wars,
like
Star Wars.
something, or like Star Wars. Like I feel like when you tell them like this, they think it's like really mundane because like their envisionment of it is so grandiose.
Yeah. That is true. That is true. I guess they could do better with recruiting. And I'm sure when they come out with recruitment videos and like mottos, they're going to be like, oh, like fight in space or stuff like that. All the recruiters of every service are very misleading. And I'm like, sometimes I'd see tours of the academy that like athletic coaches or like officers would give to like prospective high school students. Maybe would think about the academy, and we'd be walking around, and I'd be just walking to class. He'd be like, "What the hell are you talking about? Like, that's not what goes on here. Like, it is definitely a lot worse than what he's saying." Like,
A lot worse.
like I think there's a funny, like I remember, whatchamacallit, this other guy was giving a tour, and one of my good friends was asked to stop and like give some information about it. And he's like, "Do you really want to know like what I really think of this place?" And the coach is like, "Yeah, sure." Proceeds to like tell him like no details spared. And then the coach gave him an angry, like an evil look, like, "What the hell are you just saying?" He's like, "I'm just telling the truth, dude." So I guess that goes to some extent. I don't know at like civilian university if it's the same way, but definitely like at the academy and with military recruiters, there's some level of putting on like the fanfare, I guess, in order to get people to come.
I think it's funny how the coach did not pick up on the hint. That
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think, I don't know if y'all know, but the academy is a very, very cynical place, in that since like life there is on daily is just kind of shitty at times. Everyone just like hates it there. Like if someone from outside like attacks it, it's kind of like the mentality like, oh, like we'll like defend our place, and it's like, oh, like the academy's great, but on the inside, when cadets are talking to each other, they just shit on it all the time.
I think that's kind of similar to maybe like some civilian universities where they're kind of clowning on like, oh, school's really hard, tuition's always rising.
Yeah, true.
Like we don't know what's going on with the COVID plan, stuff like that. But then I think someone were to be like, oh, like I don't know, your university sucks. Like people would kind of band together and just be like, this is our shit, like
Exactly.
back away.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think people do play it up. Like maybe I don't know about to the extent like you're talking about, or like how much the recruiter played up like what life at the U.S. Air Force Academy was like, but I do definitely feel like when you kind of come in, like I think maybe college tour guides are gonna be like, yeah, like there's such a great campus dorm life, and everyone's super friendly and stuff like that. And I remember like going to my dorm, I'm like, there's not really a dorm culture here, and if there is, it's just like playing like the Wii or later the Switch when it came out. And I was like, I mean, it appeals to a certain group of people, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it is. I guess it is something. Maybe
Yeah,
not the culture that they're implying, but something. So it's not a total lie.
yeah. That's
Dorm culture in general is like super, super like influenced by like the total group. So I remember like when I lived in Chester at UT Austin, it's like one of the largest dormitories.
Mhm.
Certain floors would have like stuff, then certain floors would just be like non-interactive. So I feel like it's very, very like group dependent.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Yeah, but the institution shapes it, but it's also the people. Because like at the academy, you have like the entire wing of 4,000 people is organized into 40 squadrons of 100 each. And like so you spend 2 years in one squadron, it's called your baby squad. And then for your last 2 years, your junior and senior year, you move to another squadron. And during that like end of sophomore year, when you like find out which squad you're suppling to, it's like a pretty big time. That's one of the things that you always is like, oh, how is this squad? Like, how are the people in it? how is the commanding officer, so that's like an actual adult, like 40-year-old major, and that can have a huge influence on like how like life is in general, your quality of life, and just like the social quality as well. So I definitely get that.
Yeah, actually,
I
how
feel like
social quality of life at the academy? Sorry.
Oh, uh, well, I think like the most common question that I get that's like ancillary to that is like, hey, do you have like parties at the academy? There are no parties on campus at all. Like if you want to party, you go off base. Like cadets will rent a house or something, or they'll go to University of Colorado Boulder up near Denver to go
Oh,
party if they want to. I wasn't a big partier, but a lot of people went up there if they wanted to get rowdy on the weekends. But on campus, like no. There was definitely no partying. But there's definitely, what I would say is like any cadet who has like had fun at the academy, you always break rules because there's so many rules. And you always get in like what I would say is a there's always a gate guard story. So the Air Force Academy is a base, and because it's a base, there's security forces at the top. So it's like airmen and like fatigues with like combat gear on, and they're there to like check to make sure that like, oh, you're entering the base, like you're actually say who you are and you're authorized to enter. And we joke around that every cadet has a like a story where they're like it's a close call with security forces, and I mean it's true. Like you got to break the rules. So my one that I can remember off the top of my head was we were coming back, and well, one of the guys had been drinking underage, and he was in the trunk because we didn't have enough room in our car to bring him back. So like this was like right when we had gotten our cars, so only juniors and seniors could own cars. So this was like during the summer after our sophomore year, and we're like, oh man, excited to get a car, you know, like excited to drive off base and be free. So we get to the gate, and like if they find out there's someone in the trunk, they're gonna make him get out. Like we're gonna be in trouble already, and then they find out that he's underage drinking. Like we're all screwed. And he pulls up to the gate, and I don't know why the driver was nervous on this one instance, but the security guards will usually ask for you to roll down the back window so they can see everyone's faces and match them to the IDs. And this man, and I don't know why his car had a rolling window in the trunk, but he lowers, like the security guard's like, could you lower the window in your trunk? And then he like lowers, or can you lower the window in your back seat? And this man lowers the window of his trunk, and everybody in the car just like, what are you doing? And like the security guard kind of like, he's like looking around, like squinty eyes, and he's like, I meant your back window, sir. And so he lowers the back window. We get off on a hitch, and then as we're driving away from the checkpoint, the guy in the trunk like pops his head up. He's like, I should have braked when you lowered the back window. And that was our close call, because if we'd gotten caught, we would have gone on this thing probably called it's called alcohol probation. So if you drink underage and you're caught, or like you're caught abetting that, you're restricted to the base for 6 months, among other things.
6 months?
Yeah, and then you have to do these things called tours, which is basically where you grab one of the mock rifles that they have like lying around on campus, and you have to march in a circle for an hour, and that's one tour. And so usually for like alcohol things, I remember being on the other side, like having to award those. It'd be like maybe 30 tours. So that's 30 hours of marching you got to do on your own time. Like you got to like register for like a session on the weekend, and then you go on the weekend and you march around in a circle on the quad. And you look like a loser doing it. But it's one of like the antiquated things that's stuck with us from the 50s, I guess.
I think it's hilarious how the dude had a rolling trunk window.
Yeah,
And like
right.
in your situation, like that was the last thing y'all needed, and he actually rolled it down. That's
Exactly.
actually like almost like it was written to be part of a comedy story.
I know. And everyone has one of those stories. So if you kind of lived a little bit at the academy, and there's so many other stories of like skirting around the rules or breaking the rules. You do what you do. You do what you need to do to survive, I guess.
I feel like that gives it like higher stakes. Like it makes it arguably more exciting when you know like the punishment is so high.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's and correct me if I'm wrong, but like that's a big difference, like civilian university, because I think like if you get caught underage drinking, like depending on the university, especially if it's your first offense, it can be pretty like lenient. Yeah, just a slap on the wrist. But the academy, if you got underage drinking, yeah, you're 6 months like prisoner of the base basically. And then there's some other stuff too. I remember there was one rule, I think. So we have this thing called the combatant, who's basically like the dean of the school, who's in charge of all the military stuff. So a 1-star general. And I think we did something to like piss her off, like either intentionally or unintentionally. I don't know, like as a cadet wing or whatnot. And so what we had to do is that everyone had to do a symbolic tour. So they made the entirety of one dorm building. So that's like 2,500 people go out and, oh, it's because we left the stadium trashy after one of the football games. So they made us go out onto the quad and pick up trash for an hour. Everyone, 2,500 people, like en masse from 4 to 5 o'clock. I was like, those are our marching orders. So there's other like just wacky group punishment stuff like that, or just like really asinine things that I guess looking back on it, I have fond memories of. But at the time, I was like, this is so stupid. Like, what are we doing? Like things like that.
On
Yeah,
top
I feel.
oh, you can go.
I was gonna say like I feel like that's like that for like a lot of things. Like I feel like you always just romanticize the past, even if it was just like really stupid. Like even if you're
Yeah.
like studying really late at night for like some class that doesn't even matter, or like you and your friends are just also up late at night, just like doing something really troll and like
Hmm.
not like super helpful in the short term, but when you're old, it'll be nice to look back at.
Yeah, very true. Sorry, Ben, did you have something to say?
So I was just curious, like if this sort of like activity is frowned upon, how is it like in terms of like relationships and dating?
Oh, well, I guess I'm not the authority on dating because I didn't date the academy. But it's difficult for a guy, honestly, because it's a 70-30 ratio,
Uh,
maybe closer to a 75-25 ratio between guys and girls. So of course it's super hard for guys. And then academy guys have a certain rep in the springs, or not a rep, but it's just everyone like there's no like exotic factor like from being in the academy. If you're like trying to date a Colorado Springs girl or like you meet someone on Tinder, that's pretty difficult. So I think it's playing on hard mode as a guy out there, but that's just me. And then there's always like the Dear John letters that everyone writes in basic, or everyone gets in basic training, when like, oh, like my girlfriend from back in high school or whatever, or back home, and then 90%, 95% of those end in breakups within the first 2 months, as in like college, I would say too. Uh, but yeah, it's difficult. I certainly did not win in that facet. So,
wait, are there like rules against it, or is it free?
oh, you cannot date freshmen. That's it. Freshmen can only date freshmen. That's the only rule. And I think it's a good rule, honestly. Even if it's not an explicit rule in college, I would say it's like, if you're like a senior dating a freshman, like it's instantly going to draw some like looks. And I think for good reason, like, like someone, that girl or guy just got here, certainly new to the ropes. Like you want to make sure that there's like an equal power dynamic in the relationship. So it's the same thing in the academy, because as a freshman, you're basically like a pledge and what I like to call like a co-ed frat. And so the power dynamic is really unbalanced there. So if you have dating, that's really an abuse of power, I would say.
Interesting. It's kind of like this will sound weird, but it's kind of like dating within the family.
Yeah. Yeah. Weird from everyone outside Bama.
Good old South.
I know. Yeah, I know. Throwing another hackneyed joke in there, but
How can you joke? Was there like racial diversity in the academy, or like do you feel like it was mostly like white people?
some racial diversity. Personal opinion, of course, less so than what I would have wanted. And I didn't really notice like a problem of racial diversity, more so than just like broader like demographic diversity or geographic diversity. So, or maybe I guess that's a good thing. But I don't know about y'all, but like if you were to go to like a standard, like maybe out of state university, a lot of people come from like the cities for the various states, or concentrate in like your home state. But the way the academy is run is that you need a nomination from your congressman in order to in order for your application to be like accepted at the Air Force Academy. That's like one of the steps. So as a part of that, everyone comes from all 50 states, and they try to get at least one cadet from every congressional district. So it's pretty diverse, like demographically, but that kind of makes it so that it's a more rural constituency, I would say, at the academy than maybe what you'd see in like a normal university distribution or just like population distribution in general. And I think that certainly like skews it, like especially because the military I think is already conservative leaning, and then especially so when you have it that a lot of the cadets who are coming there are rural or their legacy military, which is another thing. Like their parents went to the academy or their parents are former military. That's also another form of like diversity that I wish the academy would make more of an effort of like outreach, so to speak.
Interesting. It
Like,
kind of reminds me of the electoral college in some ways, where like it's kind of meant to make sure like the cities don't have an overwhelming amount of voice. So then like
Yeah,
they have a lot of like rural um, opinions, I guess, in the terms of the election. I remember like recently a lot of people are like not okay with the electoral college because that's how Trump
exactly.
got elected.
Hmm.
So I'm seeing some parallels between like what you described in the Air Force situation. But yeah, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
oh, I was just gonna ask, like, what was it like interacting with a congressman to sort of apply to college? Because like that's not the general sort of like route.
Oh, true. Um, at least my congressman, I got nominated through Pete Sessions, who is no longer in office, but I think he's running in another House district to try get a seat back or something like that. Um, but it's a lot less like when people initially like hear about that and they haven't heard of it before, they're like, oh, did you have to like cozy up to the congressman or whatever, or like be like a political ally? And that's not the case at all. Most congressmen, since like you have to nominate people every year, they've got a process down to doing it. Some congressmen will just do an interview. Some will require an application. Some will require both. I had to do both for my district just because mine was like a city district in North Dallas. Or yeah, so like it was pretty competitive. So I had to do that. But I know some people who are like the only cadet who's applying out of their district in like, I don't know, northern Montana. And so they automatically get the nomination. So it can be different from both, but it's certainly not something where like, I have to like build political favors or like, I got to make money so that I can donate to this Congress and whatever. No, it's not like that, which is good, which is definitely good. But it's like a second application process, if I could say it correctly.
Mm.
Mm,
Yeah. So like you have to apply to get the nomination, and then you also have to apply to the academy itself. And you have to get the nomination, and then you also have to get accepted by the academy, and then that's how you can go. That's how you get the appointment, so to speak.
yeah, it's kind of like getting a recommendation letter from your teacher. And you think it's like a big deal and like your teacher's gonna write all this sweet stuff, and it really is just like a template and they just fill in your name, fill in some like nice adjectives and stuff like that. So
Exactly. It can certainly be like that for especially the smaller districts, and then the bigger ones, it's a little bit more. Like because a congressman can usually only nominate 2 people per academy. So like if it's a big district with a lot of people applying, like let's say there's 12 or 14 people applying, then yeah, it's super competitive to get the nomination.
mm,
So if they
Hmm.
can only nominate two, does that mean if you get the nomination, you basically get in?
No. So I've known of some people who got the nomination and didn't get in. I wouldn't say it's basically, but usually if you get the nomination, you're pretty qualified already. So your chances are high is what I would say. But it's been a while since I worried about college admissions. But stressful times, man, stressful times. But if I can remember correctly, that's what I think the percentages were,
Mm.
generally
what were
speaking.
your alternatives options then? Like if you didn't get into the Air Force?
I would have probably done, so I was still trying to go through the Air Force. So probably through a ROTC scholarship. So the Air Force and all the other services, if you win one of the scholarships, depending on the level, they'll fund you to go to a state university or an out-of-state university, as long as you get a degree in what you got the scholarship for, which is usually some sort of STEM degree. And then from there, once you graduate college, then you'll be active duty and you'll be commissioned lieutenant, same as me.
Mm,
Mm.
So I probably would have tried to done that and then go to some university through that means. Just because, again, I wasn't opposed to being in the military, and I was like, oh, this seems like a good deal, to pay for college and other things like that. So
I actually met some people that did something like that, and they had to do some certain amount of hours for like per week about something. I remember some of them were like in ROTC.
mhm. Yeah. So that's what I'm referring to with. Sorry, I say it's ROTC. That's what we all say
Uh,
uh, with the Air Force. But yeah, ROTC. Um, and if I could comment at least on the dynamic I noticed is that since at the academy you're like exposed to the military 24/7, you take it a lot less seriously than I think ROTC would, because ROTC, like, depending on your detachment, you'll have exposure to maybe 1 or 2 officers in your entire like 4 years there, and you only do that once a week, and then you go to classes for ROTC maybe like once or twice a week. So like you take it pretty seriously because like that's the only time you're doing it, and you do a good job. The academy, since you're there all the time, we mess around all the time and like take a bunch of stuff not seriously. Same thing with our superior officers too. We get sometimes pretty chummy. So that's a different dynamic I noticed. But it usually, like, the cultural differences, I say, even out by the time you get to first lieutenant rank. So like 2 years in, there's not really much of a difference you can tell between two graduates.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
So like, what would you describe like the pros and cons of doing like either like ROTC or just going to like a military academy?
Okay. At least in the context of the Air Force Academy, one of the biggest differences is that if you want to like fly in the Air Force, be a pilot, you should go to the academy, because in ROTC, let's say the Air Force Academy graduates 4,000 a year. I know ROTC, I think as a whole across the nation, graduates 12,000 to be officers. So the Air Force Academy supplies 25% of the new officers every year. Even though we only supply 25%, I'm pretty sure we get between 70 to 80% of the pilot slots allocated to the Air Force that year. And I don't know why there's that preferential treatment to the academy, but there is. So if you want to be a pilot, you can go to the academy because you can be ranked in like the 70th percentile, 80th percentile, and still get a slot. But in a ROTC, you got to be like top 10 or top 20 to get one. So that's a big advantage. And then I think if you're wanting to make a long career out of the military or get in like high public posts, the academy is a great way to make connections there. Just because I can't think of another job where like in your entire job, 25% of your like workforce is alumni.
Yeah.
Like I can't think of anything else. So that's a huge advantage. But if you're looking to get like funded for college, maybe just do 5 years or however long your service commitment is in the Air Force and then leave, or do a non-pilot job, ROTC might be the better option, and you'll probably have a better quality of life for those 4 years of college than at the academy.
Speaking of being a pilot, like for your specific like desired route, would you ever be in combat?
Yeah. If we got into a shooting war with whoever, or our commitments in Afghanistan and slight commitment in Iraq ramps up, I don't know. Yeah, definitely. Because I want to fly single seaters or equivalent, like 2-seaters. So that definitely put me in the line of fire. And regardless of whether we go to war or not, if I ever shoot like a bullet in like combat hours, I'll still be deployed at least once as like a fighter pilot or like a ground attack pilot, whatever. And that deployment location would usually be somewhere in like Qatar or like Europe, and you might get like a tour of duty, which is called like a TDY, so like a month-long deployment from Europe to like Africa or something.
Interesting. Wait, do most commercial like airline pilots, do they have military background, or is there like just a regular separate?
I don't know what the percentage is. I know a lot of pilots from the, I'll say this, I know a lot of pilots from the military will fly for the airlines afterwards because it pays really well. And it's like pretty chill hours, relatively speaking. I don't know about the percentage of civilian pilots, though, who had military backgrounds. But I would say that a lot of military pilots who want to keep flying choose to go in the civilian airlines because it's a pretty chill job to do afterwards. And you've already learned flying, so not a bad time at all.
Yeah, I was like, I remember watching like Sully, the biographical movie, and I know he was in the military. And then I think for like a lot of astronauts, they're also, I think they were part of the Air Force too. Like they had pilot experience.
Yeah, I take a particular like interest in astronauts because hopefully I could be one. And I know that's like, I was about to say reaching for the stars, but I don't want to be that cliche. But it's small chances. Like everyone knows that like that's a small chance job. But as far as I know, I think as of now, 70% of everyone who's flown into space, every American, has been a military test pilot. So like either from the Air Force or from the Navy. Basically, they go to pilot training, and then they go to test pilot school after a few assignments. So like 6 or 7 years down the road would be for me. And then after that, they apply for astronaut school. And I know a lot of the astronauts that we've sent up have been of the military background, especially back in the capsule days.
You'd be like the ultimate Asian son, like an MIT astronaut. All you're missing is a medical degree.
You've heard of like the Johnny Kim. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, it's like
exactly.
the Korean dude. Yeah, I was thinking that.
But I don't want it to like be something where it's like that would be my worst nightmare if I was like held up as an example by another Asian parent. Like, no, I've caused suffering for yet another American child.
So I've betrayed my own people.
Exactly. Because this is just going to be like social diversity kind of thing, at least for Asian Americans. Like, we certainly need, and we're certainly trending the right direction, but like more Asian Americans outside of the STEM fields, you know. And I don't know if, I guess we can talk because we're all in the STEM field, but like I support wholeheartedly anyone who's Asian who like chooses, hey, like I want to do art, theater, like writing, or something that's like not traditional one that like your parents would like value, because it's good. It's good for the nation. It's good for Asian Americans, stuff like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Actually, I was talking earlier to a friend who's doing music. I remember telling him like, oh, like I actually appreciate people like you because you help out for like culture and stuff. And he looked at me kind of funny. He's like as if like my motives aren't that grand, but even so, like I still think my point stands. Like I feel like if everyone was a doctor, everyone was an engineer, it's like your focus is just like kind of making money and just like, you know, really on the technical side of things. But I really feel like how like I guess true art or like, you know, moments in history are created, or like the stuff that has impact like aren't necessarily from people in STEM, like people in like liberal arts.
Yeah. Sorry, Ben, did you have something?
Oh no, I was just agreeing. Go for it.
I think it's just important just for like, the broader progress of culture, like Asian American status in American society. But it's also, I think, just important, I think, on a personal level too. Like, I want to be like the kid who, yes, like carries on the culture, and I'll admit firsthand that I have not done the best job of doing that. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be the case where like, I either have like carry my Asian culture in one hand, or like I'm free to choose what I want to do in society on the other hand. Like, kids should have the option to do both. And I think especially our generation, like first generation immigrants, I don't know about you, Alex, but that's like a certain struggle that we have to go through in terms of like wrestling with that dichotomy, if I could say correctly. And it's difficult, and I would want the next generation to both be like, hey, like don't forget your heritage, and hopefully I can learn enough to pass it on to the next generation, while at the same time saying like, you are free to choose what you want to. This is what like this great experiment of our nation was made for. So you should be free to choose.
Yeah, I totally agree actually. Like I think like a big thing that sort of holds back our generation is the fact that like our parents are very risk averse, right?
Yeah.
It has to trend down like this path that is like secure, and like you'll be financially secure and like yada yada yada, because they like, I don't want to like group them into a box because I think that's a little generalistic and like not well intentioned, but like I think in general, like sort of like the immigrant mindset is that like you need to make money first and you can figure everything else later.
Yes, I would totally agree. And I mean, I really try to temper down and like understand where my parents are coming from, because yes, they struggle a lot. And like, I think one of the great realizations that you have, like that maybe late teen me started realizing, like 18-year-old me, and then onwards, like your parents are human too. Like if I was thus in the same situation, like immigrating to a new country, like having a kid, I'd be like, what the hell do I do? So like, I certainly get that sentiment, and like, I want to empathize with like where they're coming from. And I think that helps in terms of like communication later on. Like, hey, like mom and dad, like if I were to have kids and like these are your grandkids, like I think it's important that like you emphasize like, hey, like you're free to choose what you want to do, because as long as like they're hardworking and like they, I don't know, like try to be a good person, things will work out in the end, and they can make a living, because at the end of the day, it's not all about like getting the big house and everything like that. So
Yeah, I definitely agree with what y'all are both saying. Because I think for a lot of times, like I think for like my parents are also first generation immigrants. They came from Hong Kong, and I think their mindset a lot of times is just like I came from a not so great background, and like I want to make sure I have a well off life for myself and my family. And I think money is like the first thing. And like I won't deny that money definitely like runs the world, and like you can't really live life without money. But I think it's kind of sad. I feel like a lot of Asian parents kind of go for like a more materialistic lifestyle, and then I feel like at least for me personally, it becomes really empty when like all you do is like how much more money I can make, and like just like everything you do is like going for the next step, the next I guess best career prospects or goals, and I think that's also kind of going back to like liberal arts or doing things like outside of that. It's just that, like you kind of learn to appreciate the little things, or like doing things because you truly like it versus like, oh, I just want to become a programmer because we can make 100K like right out of college.
Yeah, exactly. One of your comments about like it's about the little things really caught on, just like both in like personal fulfillment and I'm gonna bring it back all the way to the very beginning when you're talking about like the nostalgia of like shitty experiences that somehow end up being like, like I'm glad I did it. Like it's strange how like we can make that. I don't know if we like consciously make that value judgment, but maybe unconsciously, where it's like I'm gonna do this like shitty experience now. I'm gonna have good memories of it, and it's gonna be worth it. And this is what it's gonna not necessarily define my life, but define like my perception of the life I've lived. Because I think at the end of the day, like you'll go through life, live 365 days a year, but on a good year, you'll maybe remember 60 of those days. And depending on what you did those 60 days is what's going to shape like how I view the future, how I interact with people, things like that. I don't have any really conclusion with this, just noting like, wow, that's pretty curious. And I think if we took the time to realize that more, I guess we could live each day like a little bit more enjoyably.
I actually have a little anecdote to build on top of that, because in my freshman year and senior year of high school, I journaled. And
Mm-hmm.
I noticed exactly what you're saying. Like most days, like nothing of interest happened. It was all very mundane. And then some like that, so that made my entries all very short. And then certain days they're just like exponentially longer, just because like it's part of those 60 days that are like infinitely more eventful. Like even in my freshman year, when I felt like I was doing stuff all the time, like when you come down at the end of the day and sit down and like type out this stuff, like it really wasn't that eventful. But then there are some days that are just like, damn, I felt like I was doing something every single hour.
Yeah, that is so crazy. And I don't know if y'all ever think of this, but I was the other day, like I was going through my checklist of like, hey, like you moved to a new duty station, like this is what you need to accomplish. And one of them was updating our address for our notice of death and benefit stuff. So in the military, like if you were to die on duty, whether it be through accident or combat, the military needs to know your address and who you'd like to contact if like you passed away, and like who to give your benefits to. And so like that's like the movies show where like like the person comes in person to notify the family like, hey, like your son or daughter has passed away, or whoever you let them notify, like, hey, I want this person to know. So that's actually how they do it in the military actually. But changing the address for that made me think like, man, I hope like I'm spending my days well, and I'm not necessarily just wasting it, but like living them to the fullest. But at the same time, like mundane doesn't necessarily mean it's not lived to the fullest. But at the same time, I don't want to be caught up in petty stuff every single day. And that really made me think, I guess, of my mortality, even though I'm only 22. But uh, I think it's certainly a question that I should consider, considering the career field I'm about to enter. Uh, and I think a lot of cadets on the surface, and like pilots and whoever's in like combat arms and military, just military general, like they avoid that question. But at the end of the day, I think everyone is given at least some thought to like, oh, what would happen if like misfortune were to befall me? And I guess for me, that comes back to how I want to live each day, even if most days I forget that like that's my broader motivation.
For sure. Like I think for me is like honestly, like when you remember stuff, like you don't exactly remember each detail of what happened that day. You kind of remember like your feelings of like what happened that day,
Yeah.
right? Was I happy during this period, or was I sad during this period? And I remember I was reading this manga, and it was actually really good that it actually like changed the way how I viewed the world. And so it's like a sports kind of rom-com manga, and I know that sounds weird, but basically how the author like drew and wrote the story was like he never like made like plot points super obvious. Like you knew stuff would happen, like oh like this guy asks like the main girl on a date, or he's able
Yeah.
to score a home run or something like that. But all he did is like he made everything seem like a lot more understated. So it was like the stuff he did like he made her laugh, or like he finally like he had to work really hard in practice one day, and like those are the moments that stood out. And like I remember like reading like a Reddit thread kind of about like this author, and then they were like, yeah, like basically the theme of his stuff is like kind of going back to like it's the little things in life that matter, right? Like when you die, like it's not necessarily like oh I got married or I became president of the United States. It's like how did I treat people in my everyday life? Like how did I carry myself, and like how did I, what did I stand for? Stuff like that. And I was like, oh, I remember like thinking like, oh, like this is actually a really good point. Like yes, you can like kind of like try to define your life by all these checkpoints that you do, but like if the stuff in between is like something that you don't really remember fondly, or like it was just not enjoyable at all, like honestly, like most of your life, like I mean, wasn't really that great. But like that's just like my perspective.
Hmm. And honestly, like you live through every day, but when you look back on like, hey, the 22 years that I've lived, like what you remember is again like the real positive, real negative, and just like the straight and silly and mundane stuff. But that kind of, if you think of it like existentially, and I don't want to get there, but like that's like the life that you lived, those little snippets that you remember. And so yeah, it's not the big things.
Yeah, a
Good
friend
point.
actually said a really interesting thing to me recently about college. He was describing like how it feels like it goes by so quickly, but when you're in it, it doesn't. And he was like, the days are long, but the weeks pass by quickly.
Yeah, yeah. Strange how the human mind can do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think damn, that is so like so true.
Yeah, I
Nothing
just
else to say
I
about
don't
it.
know because like like a lot of our friends are graduating, like we're graduated. Like you see a lot of like sentimental posts about like, hey, like these 4 years flew by me. Like it just felt like the other day as a freshman. And like even now I feel like that. I feel like, I was just a freshman the other day. Like it feels so like odd now that like I've hit that like benchmark that like you see a lot of other people like glamorizing. I'm not gonna say it's not glamorous. It's just like odd that now I'm in a different life stage.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. The one thing that like I noticed the biggest difference was is like I mean at it, I feel like at every like one of these milestones in your life, it's kind of like a culling point for like your social circle, like the people who like you choose to keep in contact with versus the people like kind of fall by the wayside either uh, deliberately or otherwise. Um, it's the same way like graduating high school, like you find out the friends you keep in touch with and the friends you don't. And then I think especially like leaving the college like educational sphere, and I have 2 more years of it, but it's grad school, I guess. But after that, like I think the one big thing that I've learned is that like you need to like physically reach out to people to keep in touch, and it takes effort, at least for me, just because I'm not a natural person just like text or call someone out of the blue. But it's something that I want to get better at, and it's something that I like. Man, like I guess this is part of being an adult, like whoopee. But I don't know if y'all noticed that like changing dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually recently like reached back out to like some high school friends, and I was actually really scared because I was like, what would they think about this? Like, would it be weird if someone like me just randomly mentioned out of the blue? Like, do they even care? And like honestly, I remember what I like realized was that honestly people are just happy that like that you even thought about them, right? And I realized like
Yeah,
we all kind of go through the same thing. I remember in high school and like early parts of college, like I was very lonely, and I thought that I was the only one who felt lonely. And then the older I got, I realized like everyone is actually pretty lonely. Like to be human is to be lonely, like honestly. And um, I think that kind of made me feel like connected to everyone in a way, like we're all suffering together. But I think just part of like the whole human experience is like realizing that like you have to put an effort to build relationships with other people, and like I think there's like this big thing in culture, kind of maybe around like our age, that like you don't want to seem as the guy who's like putting in more than the other person. You don't want to sound like too clingy, right? And I feel like people are always like, I'm not gonna follow this person on Instagram if they don't follow me first, you know, or I'm not going to like reach out to these people, they never reach out to me or stuff like that. And like I think the older I get, I'm kind of like, honestly, that's kind of dumb, you know, because if everyone thinks the same thing, then like we're never going to connect with each other. And I think that's part of like growing up, and I think that's honestly what makes postgrad so hard, is that you're used to like kind of everything just being super spontaneous and coming by super easily. But then I feel like when you kind of start becoming more intentional, like it is hard, but it is like very worth it.
Agreed. Agreed. And definitely your comment on like mutual suffering builds relationships. If I could characterize the academy in one phrase, it'd be suffering as an institutional tool to build connections. Like that was what basic training was. Like at the end of the day, like basically like, oh, how are we going to get like 30 people who are going to come into this new squad and to like be friends, or not necessarily be friends, but learn how to work together. And it's like any sort of like leadership course, like, or summer camp that you'll go to, like, oh, let's like solve this challenge. But in basic training, it's like, let's solve this challenge of like making it through the day and like getting yelled at the least. And it's surprisingly fast how quickly you will dispense with like the social small talk and just get down to business. Say like, hey, like this is what we do X, and like you'll learn pretty fast. Like, hey, I can work with you. Hey, I can't work with you, or like we can be friends, or like we can be acquaintances, kind of thing. It's amazing how like if you just push it through like the grinder, you'll find out the veneer is shaved off, and you'll see pretty fast like what the relationship entails.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So is this what sort of brought about the mentality of like, oh, each transition in life, so like you cull down your friend circles?
I think more so just moving, I guess. So for me, moving to Boston, and then also just grappling with the fact like, hey, I've chosen a career where I'm going to have to move every 2 or 3 years. And like, that is going to be my life for at least the next decade. And that is definitely not a common thing for a lot of people. Like, I think a lot of people will just stay in one city for at least more than 3 years, you know, or they won't be moving around so often, but that's like part of the gig for me. So that just made me think like, hey, like who's the list of people that I want to like make a deliberate effort to keep in contact with and overcome again that like social nervousness barrier that Alex has talked about. Just like, am I being weird and reaching out? Because it is true that I've never got a poor reaction from that. And then when like you reached out, I was like, hey, like long time no see, like definitely was not opposed to you reaching out and getting back in contact. So
Yeah, it's like I just remember like thinking, I guess throughout college that like, oh, like, you know, like people are so different, like than what I actually realized them to be. Like I would always kind of view people as like kind of by like the labels they put on themselves. So like, you know, like if a person was like seemingly cool, I'd be like, oh, I can't talk to him. Like he's too cool for me. Like I'm over here and he's up there, you know. And then the older I got, I realized like honestly, like I feel like this kind of hierarchical like mindset that you kind of do is like no one like actually really cares about that. And then like everyone has their own insecurities, right? So I think also like, you know, knowing that as you grow up like also helps in like reaching back out to people, and like even like making friends with people you don't necessarily know, because I think like when you're young you're kind of just friends with like whoever was sat next to you in class, and then
yeah,
the older you get, at least for guys, I think you're kind of just friends with people who have the same interests as you. If that's like playing league, playing basketball. But I think like even beyond that, it's like starts to kind of become like the values you share, or you know maybe even the sense of humor.
yeah, very, very well said. Very well said. And I think what you said about like people's insecurities, realizing that that's also very true. And like, I think it makes them more human. Like when you realize like, hey, X person, Y person has insecurities, because at least in my opinion, either people are really good at hiding their insecurities broadly, but I think it's partially true, or like, at least me personally, you can sometimes get in the trap like, like this person is just way better than me. Like X, Y, or Z, like I can't talk to them, or like they hurt my sense of pride or whatever. But at the end of the day, like they're human too. They have their insecurities. They may have some things better down on lock, but of course that's not going to be the whole gig. They have the things they're trying to improve on or like very insecure about, and it makes the connection more real when you realize that, and you don't even have to say it out loud. Just acknowledging it is a big step.
Yeah, I feel like that was like something I didn't know how to come to grips with when I was younger. Like I remember back in the day, I went to a more competitive high school, and so I feel like everyone developed their own sense of like superiority complex, and just like to guard against your own like insecurities. Like for example, I remember someone put it to me very well, and I leaned into that as well. Like I was like, okay, so I go to the gym, and I see some guy, and he's like significantly weaker than me, and I think to myself, oh, like I got the leg up on me. I got the leg up on him, even if he's smarter than me. I got this over him, right? And then vice versa. Like if they're stronger than me, like, oh, I'm smarter than them. It's like I think it was like that mentality was just like meant to guard against your own like fear of inadequacy.
Yeah, I don't know why it's so hard, and it's a struggle every day. But like getting past it, like tit for tat, like comparison level things, just even implicitly, and just saying like, hey, like it's fine that I am worse than this person at everything I can see. Like as long as he acknowledges me for like the human soul that I am, and I do the same to him, like you'd be surprised the relationship that can come out of that. So,
That kind of makes me curious because like I don't know this specifically like an Asian American thing, but I feel like in a lot of like our like parents' households, they were kind of teaching us like you have to make an impact, or you have to make sure like someone like notices you, or you have to stand out. And like a lot of that way is to have like a specific talent, right? So you can either be really good at the violin, or you can be really good at math. And I feel like, I mean, there were like those Asian star child, like I knew some people who like, would go to math competitions and stuff like that, and their parents would show them off. Sorry, I may be getting a little too specific here, but anyway, it's just like, stuff like that, like kind of makes you feel like it kind of carries over into your adult life when you're kind of thinking like, oh, like I have to be like really good at this or naturally talented at this, and that makes me special, right? When I think as corny as it is, the older you get, you realize you're special for just being like true to yourself and true like who you are, because everyone thinks a little differently and they offer a little perspective that another person does not share, and it's great to like kind of have two people like talk, kind of like what we're doing right now, and like sharing our own perspectives and opinions and helping us form like a fuller picture of understanding.
Exactly, definitely a fuller picture, and not pinning your identity on like an ability that you have to compare to others, because that's always a dangerous thing. It's something I wrestle with too a lot. I think like the best way, or like the best like arena that I could like exemplify like all my struggle in working with that was like tennis. Tennis is like an explicit example of like I am going to compare my skill against yours and see who comes out the better. And I wish I could tell middle school me like, hey, it doesn't like matter if he's better or you're better. What matters is like that you enjoy like the spirit of competition. Like you enjoy like, I don't know, the rush that you get when you compete. Because I definitely didn't enjoy that as middle school, but ironically enough, it's like the one thing I miss about it now. Not get losing or winning per se, but it's like the rush of competition and the rush of like trying to win, but not trying to say like, to prove that I am good at tennis skill or whatever.
I actually agree with Albert. We competed at a similar level.
Yeah, we did.
And like the match I remember most vividly, I was talking about this recently with my parents just because like I randomly remembered it, and it's like a match I lost, but it was such a tight match. And I remember like by the end we were both wheezing, like we just couldn't breathe. Like when the match finally ended, it was like the max amount you could go. I think I lost the first set 4-6. I won the second one 7-5. And then the last was a tiebreaker. It was like to 10. And
was this in a tournament?
It was in a CMZ, and we went to 14.
Oh, we went to 14?
14 in the tiebreaker.
Oh, damn. I mean, yeah, that's so true. And like, those are like the matches you live for. And you can extrapolate to life however you want. But like the close matches where you're really like putting in your all and just enjoying like the fight. That's the best way I could put it. And like enjoying the fight. Of course, it hurts to get snubbed and it's less fun. But like, just like, it's nice like getting in the easy win, but those are like the matches you live for. And like, I can identify like one or two tournament ones like those, and like one in high school. And And then like another topic I would say, so at the academy, to bring it back there, you have to take two fighting classes. Like those are requirements, core requirements. So one of them is boxing, and I got wasted in boxing. I was not a good boxer. Like I remember like, so the academy is the only place I know where like you have like core PE classes, and the way you get tested is like through measurable skills. So like for these fighting classes like boxing and combatives, which is like you're on the ground like doing chokeholds and stuff, the way they grade you is they put you against some of the students, like they're going to grade you on technique, but you also get points for winning, which is like so nerve-wracking because there's only 2 tests in the entire class, and so it's 2 fights. I remember on my second boxing fight, and that was when you're allowed to throw your strong hand to your right hand. So the first match, you're only allowed to throw jabs, so your left hand. I got hit with, I can't remember, right-handed, left-handed punch or whatever. I got hit right square in the forehead, and then I fell down. I was like, and my nose started bleeding. I'm like, I swear I'm okay. Like, this looks really embarrassing, I know, but I'm good. But of course, it looked really terrible. And so, like, that was not the match you wanted. But then in combatives, where I actually had some skill, and like there was a close fight, it's kind of insane how much you enjoy just the nature of like a good, close, competitive fight. And then I think in terms of those combative sports, it brings it out to a whole nother level, and just like, because what they want to see and what you're trying to do yourself is like bring out that, see if you have that like inner fight, like that inner kind of quote unquote animal in you, and see if like you can actually bring it out. And I thought that was an interesting and honestly very illuminating like experience at the academy, even though I'll say like to every kid that I hated those classes, but there's some positive to it.
Interesting.
To start wrapping up, because we are starting to ink over our time, we use like this question to start wrapping up. What are your plans post quarantine?
Oh, plans post quarantine. The 2 things I missed most: concerts. So I'm a fan of Oh Wonder. It's an indie pop band, and they were gonna come play in Denver in April, and it got canceled. And since they're an indie band, they like tour once every like 4 years. So I was super pissed about that. So next time they go, no matter where it is, as long as it's in Europe or America, I'm fucking going. Second thing is sports games. So I love to watch live sports, like go to the stadium and stuff. So whenever that comes back, big fan. So when the NBA comes back in 7 days, you bet I'm watching that.
For sure.
Those are the things I miss the most.
The scrimmages are already out. So
yeah, I saw the highlights for the Mavs and Lakers scrimmage.
Yeah.
Or at least saw the thumbnail for it. I need to take a look at that later.
Yeah. All I know is we won. It's a scrimmage, so it doesn't mean anything.
All right. Hopefully if the Mavs take it all, that'd be insane.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
I hope so.
We'll probably make the playoffs. I was like thinking about, but like there's only 8 games and we're like 7 games ahead of like
we're definitely
AFC.
making the playoffs.
So I was like, well, it'll be time. Kristaps will make his first playoffs.
I know.
We'll be back.
Kristaps and Luka. Luka's younger than us. Wow.
He is. He's he's 98, right?
What?
Only a couple. I think he's born in 1998, so he's only a couple months younger than at least me.
Oh, really? I thought he was born.
Oh, no. Actually, I'm trolling. He's born in February 1999. I just
yeah. Because I remember he turned like 20 just recently or something like that.
Yeah, I confused him with Christian Pulisic, who's like a soccer player.
Oh, that guy. Yeah.
Chelsea. Yeah, he's born in September 1998. Yeah, we might have a good soccer team in the future. But yeah, anyway.
Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Anyway, wrapping things up. This is a nuanced nonsense. We're not experts, but we just like talking. Signing out.
Thanks, y'all.